So, hi everyone. Today we have special guest interviewee with us, and our conversation is anchored to the Smarter Sustainability series. And we are in conversation with Chatura Rodrigo, former colleague and longtime friend, reconnecting after a while. So, it's a great pleasure. Hi, Chatura.
Hi, Anushka.
Hi. So we are going to talk about a very timely topic these days that we've seen a lot of debate on already, which is the government's decision and the president's announcement to pursue organic agriculture and ban chemical fertilizers and other chemical inputs virtually overnight. And I'm sure many of you have seen a lot of this debate go on. So we thought we'll reach out to Chatura because he is an agriculture economist and he has been a researcher in the agriculture field for more than 15 years, having worked with the UN Institute of Policy Studies, which is where he and I were colleagues, and also he has worked with Learn Asia. And he has been a consultant to the World Bank, ADB Institute, EU, IFAD, ITC, AUSAID, USDA, and so on. So a lot of international organization consulting experience. And uniquely, I think he is not an academic agricultural economist or just a researcher. He works very closely with producers, processors, exporters of agricultural commodities. And in fact, he says that his passions are sustainable agriculture, including organic farming. So it's interesting to have this conversation with him. Chatura is a product of University of Peradeniya and University of Guelph in Canada. So Chatura, I'm going to dive right in by starting with the big
Sure.
question on the table before we go any further, and that is, can Sri Lanka do it? This overnight push for organic farming. What are your thoughts?
Right. Thanks, Anushka. Thank you for inviting me. Good question to start with. So the simple answer is, Anushka, overnight it is not possible. And but I want to elaborate my answer a bit. So if we take the history of agriculture in the country, we need to kind of have a snapshot to understand what has happened. So we started with an organic agriculture as an organic agriculture country, but with the population increase and all that, we had to go for new improved varieties and synthetic fertilizers and all that, because we have to match the increasing population and food demand. And but around 10-15 years ago, once we achieved our food securities and all that, then we started considering about the environment and health and all that. And but still the larger push towards moving away from subsidies and all that into agriculture sector came from the economic burden that it put on. If you look at the fertilizer subsidy that was extended for farmers who were doing inorganic agriculture, it's a huge chunk of the GDP. So it was not sustainable at all. So then the governments, the successive governments and people and advocates, everybody started talking about, why don't we try to promote more and more local agriculture, more sustainable agriculture, right? So that's where the whole discussion started. And because of that discussion, quite a lot of things happened. Now, as a country, we started going towards good agriculture practices. Now, it's one of the sustainable agriculture models which we use only permitted or recommended level of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And then we started doing NPM or non-pesticide management agriculture. And in terms of processing, we adapted good management practices. So all these things were in the pipeline, but we were never in a position to go for an overnight decision of organic agriculture. So when this sudden shift happened, I don't think none of us were ready for that. And that's where this whole thing started. Okay, are we ready? How can we do this? How much time do we need actually? This discussion started because of that. Right.
So, Chatura, you mentioned that some of these were already in progress and some steps were being taken, albeit baby steps. So, before I go to my next question, I just have a quick follow up. in your view, based on those shifts that were happening, non-pesticide management and so on, what would have been a natural timeline for this transition if it was going according to that measured approach, baby steps?
Right, sure. Now, Anushka, if you look at the international experiences that we have, I mean, from basically from our region, now if you look at Bhutan, Bhutan started this around 2008 with a plan of going for a fully fledged organic country within 10 years, but it didn't work out. So, in the middle of this whole journey, they revised it and added another several years to their whole plan. And then, if you look at even India, even Sikkim province, they went for an full organic transition, but it took more than 10 years. But even that was possible because to begin with, this whole Sikkim province was doing predominantly organic agriculture. So they only had to transfer a little bit. But if you look at our situation, now if you look at our total land cultivation and the amount of land being cultivated as organic, it's only less than 1%. So it's very little, right? And now you imagine a situation where you have to transform all the other 99% overnight. So the realistic plan, Anushka, I would say has to be at least 10 years with a revision in the middle with an open mind to extend it further 5 or 6 years.
Right, that's a good call out, Chatura. So from what you're saying, doing this overnight is not feasible, and of course not ideal. Naturally, if we were to do it better, it would be over 10 years. So in that kind of a time, and if the government and other stakeholders want to definitely go down this road, what would be the 3 or 4 main areas that you'd recommend looking at in order to make this transition more manageable, more feasible for all parties concerned?
Right. Um, so as you said, Anushka, I'll only pick only 3 or 4 areas because I mean I can list quite a lot. But to begin with, let's try to categorize it. So we need to look for inputs because it's a production system, right? Then we need to look at markets because something has to be traded, and then at the end of the day, we need to look at for policies, right? Because this has to be implemented under a framework. So if you look at the production system, inputs are the most important thing, and where would these inputs come from? Now, earlier, as I said earlier, only one less than 1% was under organic. Now we have to cater for a other 99% as well. So where would the fertilizer come from? Where would the organic pesticide come from? Where would these ingredients come from? I mean, for example, Anushka, we say, okay, you can make an easy organic fertilizer with cow dung and green manure and mixing everything together. But imagine doing that for the whole paddy sector in the country. Where would this come from, right? And then again, because it is an organic system, this value chain is very special. It's a certified system. I mean, it's organic because it's certified, right? So how can this certification can be achieved, right? How can we maintain the conformity in this certification process? All these things has to be think properly. And even seeds, you can't simply bring in seeds and plant in a organic farm and say, okay, our things are organic. No, it has to be certified, right? So that's one aspect. And next one is knowledge. Even though, Anushka, I say that we come from a proud history of organic agriculture, are those is that traditional knowledge enough for us to go for this modernized agriculture era, right? For example, whatever we made during the past time, is it efficient for us to work with new improved varieties? That's the question, right? So that means there has to be quite a lot of knowledge generation, and that knowledge has to be generated from the scientific community or academia. It has to be generated from the think tanks, and also it has to be generated from the public as well, because there are farmers who we identified as champion farmers in organic agriculture. So there's quite a lot of knowledge within them as well. So we need to bring all this knowledge together and have a mechanism to disseminate this. Now, even if you go to Department of Agriculture website, for all the inorganic practices, you will have handbooks, you will have recommendation leaflets, everything. But for organic, what do we have? We don't have anything yet, right? So we need this, because otherwise how are we going to educate the farmer, right? And the other one is incentives. Now, if you look at why farmers did organic agriculture, predominantly it is because of the price. Now, for them to produce organic agriculture, there is an obvious opportunity cost, right? And that opportunity cost was met in the market, so that's how the trade happened. But we always saw the price premium, and that price premium was the main attractive point for farmers. Now, when the whole country goes organic, how can you make sure that price premium is there, right? I mean, we can come up with different scenarios, but the question is, how can we keep the farmer motivated? Or are we in a position to say that, okay, do organic agriculture, you're going to get a better price? Are we in that position, right? And then, Anushka, also we have to prioritize. Now, if you look at the whole agriculture sector, especially with an emphasis on the export sector, now some of specialized exports come from special cultivation models like hydroponic methods, aeroponic methods. Now, can we introduce organic agriculture inputs into such a system overnight? Right? Even the government decided to do this. Very recently they did some changes, allowing, especially for greenhouses, to use these inorganic materials in their cultivation, because organic components are not available for them. So we Anushka, we need to have a prioritization as well. What sectors are we going to convert immediately into organic, and how are we going to do that? And finally, so that's the market. So then finally, policy. Now, we'll talk about policy later, but do we have an organic dominant or organic focused policy in the country? That's the biggest question. So these things have to be answered, Anushka.
Thanks, Chatura. And I think I found it very interesting in an interesting recent article you had written about this aspect of
Sure.
hydroponic agriculture, because you tend to think of organic inorganic debate in terms of the fields out there and the cultivation out there in the open, but increasingly we're seeing this farming in controlled environments, especially for the tourism sector, for exports. And it
Yeah.
takes a minute for us to remember that even that has to be converted to organic if you're looking at it. Um,
Yeah.
you have worked extensively with farmers during your many rounds and many roles in doing field research. Could you shed some light on your reflections when interacting with them on how farmers adjust to these kind of policy and regulatory shifts and their coping strategies or adjustment strategies? Can you give us an insight from that perspective, Chandra?
Sure. The way I look at it, Anushka, is from 2 points. So what are the biggest issues for farmers? Broadly, right? The first one is uncertainty, right? It's embedded in agriculture. The second one is information asymmetry. So information in terms of prices, markets, how to do agriculture, everything included, right? So when you post something like this onto their hand, saying that, okay, from tomorrow, chemical fertilizers and pesticides are not available, you have to work with organic. First, they're going to panic, obviously, because they have been used to such a system with a heavy subsidy, right? And now suddenly that subsidy is not there, the fertilizer is not there, the agrochemicals are not there, and how are we going to do this? So the panic's going to set in, and that's where you see quite a lot of farmers are being vocal about their uncertainties and their perception towards this. And basically, they are expressing their anger and frustration. So panic will set in. That's an obvious reaction, right? That's number one. Then what usually they would do, Anushka, is that they know their uncertainties, so they will try to match it up, and they will say, okay, if I'm going to do organic, where does land come from? Because can I use my existing inorganically cultivated land to organic agriculture? Now, we all know you can't do that overnight. It's going to take 3 to 5 years to convert it to organic. So within that time, what is my market? How am I going to sell it? Because it's neither inorganic, neither organic, right? So these things, they're going to question that. And then they will question, okay, where I'm going to get certification. If you look at certification thing, Anushka, existing value chains, most of organic value chains, the certification cost is mostly funded by either the exporter or the processor. So farmer was actually not absorbing the certification cost, which is a huge cost. Now suddenly you are asking the farmer to absorb that. Now, now the farmer will be thinking, okay, how I'm going to do that? So obviously now the department has to come in and give some sort of a subsidy to them, saying that okay, government will bear your certification cost. But right now we have not heard about these things, right? So that's how the panic will set in. Then they will start, analyzing and seeing, okay, where I'm going to fit. And obviously they are going to be what we call the first time adapters, right? The subsistence farmers, or let's say people who are doing home gardening, will not worry about it, because they can simply transform. No, it's their own consumption. They will be okay. And these larger guys, guys who are doing more than 10 acres, 15 acres, will be okay as well, because they have money. So once they have money, they can, let's say for example, they can have a composting facility within their land, and then start gradually making fertilizer for them and do this transition. But what about that middle group? The middle group that we identify as semi-commercial farmers, who have somewhere between half a acre land and 5 acre land, right? What about them? They are the ones who's going to be, right, in a very bad situation, but they will be first adapters, because they will have to adapt and see whether it's going to work or not. Now what will happen is, after first or 2 seasons, probably this middle cohort will drop out. Most of the middle cohort will drop out, because either they can have enough investment to cover the certification cost and the practices and everything, or they can't find markets, right? And or they are not, they don't have, let's say, their opportunity cost is not being met by the prices, so they will fall out. So at the end of the day, Anushka, this whole agriculture operation will have two results. The number of farmers going to go down. Then obviously that will challenge the production levels. That's why most of the economists and these experts are pointing towards a food shortage. They are suspecting there are going to be a food shortage, because farmers will adapt, but the majority will fall down from that operation. So that is why even the article that you mentioned, Anushka, I was specifically saying, if you want to make this a success, you have to now think of a subsidy system, because otherwise, how are you going to keep these guys who are falling off the wagon? You have to have some sort of a subsidy system, either a cash transfer for them, or subsidize their certification cost, or maybe establish a market system. Because now I don't think none of us have really thought about how this whole business in the wholesale market system or the economic center system would work with an organic mechanism.
So it's
None of the traders,
multiple stages
exactly,
in that value chain need to be considered.
exactly. So my final suggestion, or the thinking, Anushka, is that the subsistence farmer will be okay. The one who's managing a home garden system or a spice garden system will be okay. The guys who are already working with in the organic value chain with the exporters or the processors will be okay as well, right? The larger farmers will be okay as well, because they have investment, they have money. But the middle cohort, the ones who are operating around 1 acre to 5 acre land, are the ones who gonna face the biggest problem.
And Chatra, would you say that this middle cohort is the larger cohort than the first and the second? I mean, in terms of numbers of people that it touches, numbers of farmers, numbers of dependents, would you think that this is the bigger one?
That's the bigger one, Anushka. That's the biggest one. That's the biggest one.
I have a quick question before I have a question on policy that I want to get to, Chatra, but
Right.
can we envisage, because you mentioned, prioritize, right? So perhaps we prioritize certain crops or even parts of the country, whatever. Can we envisage a scenario where Sri Lanka is not 100% organic in every part of the country, in every piece of land cultivated, but rather it is more segregated? The reason I ask this is because I hear some of the folks in the export leadership of the country, export agenda leadership from the government, arguing that this is an excellent policy, we have to pursue it, because we will be the first country that can say our entire country grows and exports organic. Now that is a ambition, but it's also ambition and might sound unrealistic, but it's also a very strong compelling proposition to say. But under something more feasible, we might have not the whole country 100% blanket and can go to the world and say we are 100% organic. Instead, you have pockets in terms of regions or pockets in terms of sectors or crops. Do you think that kind of a scenario can happen, or are we looking at absolutes? We can't go we can't go halfway, and we can't do these pieces. What are your thoughts on that? Because I've been trying to think of this as well.
I I think I agree with the point that you raised. So we have to think of a kind of a segregated situation. We have to identify pockets. So we have to identify or prioritize value chains, as I said earlier. Now, if you look at the export sector in the country under organic, majority is spices. Majority are spices, and then you would have a little bit of fruit and vegetable, but it's very limited. You will have quite a lot of coconut based products, I mean virgin organic virgin coconut oil and all that. And then you have a bit of tea as well, right? So these sectors are already being exposed to organic markets, organic procedure, internal control systems, certifications, farmer groups are established and all that. So I think that's where we need to start, escalating this, right? So you can bring in more spice crops into this value chain, or you can expand the spice operations, you can expand the tea operations, you can expand the coconut operations. That's number one. Then number two is whatever we have been doing under protected and precision agriculture. Now that means whatever we have been doing under polytunnels or fully fledged greenhouses, that also an area where we can think of a gradual transition, not immediate but gradual, right? So that has to be gradual. And when you try to do, say for example, vegetables, we have to be a bit careful, because vegetable is a short-term crop, Anushka. Now I'll give you a bit of a scientific background to this. Any fertilizer that you put onto a plant, either it is inorganic or organic, the plant only absorbs the nutrient, right? The mineral. It only absorbs the inorganic form of it. So the beauty of chemical fertilizer is that it releases these chemicals very easily within a couple of hours maybe, or within a couple of days. But if you look at the organic fertilizers, unless the organic fertilizer is very efficient, right, it releases these fertilizer in a bit of a elongated period of time, right? So that means it's going to take some time for the plant to absorb these nutrients if you put it in an organic form, right? So then that poses a challenge for short-term vegetables, right? Now, if you go to Nuwara region, Anushka, the people who are doing inorganic vegetables, they sometimes do 3-4 seasons during the year, right? But when you go and identify the organic guys, most of the time it's 2 times per year, because they can't go for 4 seasons because the fertilizer is not that responsive for plants. So that's how I think it has to go. So you take the export cohort, you try to expand that first, and then you take the precision and protected agriculture cohort, then gradually try to expand it. But vegetable sector, basically you have to have a long-term plan.
Okay, very interesting. So Chatura, when I reflect on some of the things you're saying about needing to calibrate some of these policies, having to think of the knock-on impacts, having to look at for example the subsidy, which is a key part of our welfare policies, agricultural policies, that subsidy has to be completely redesigned now. It can't just be the usual fertilizer subsidy. So all of this comes to my question now about policy, and I want to turn to the policy processes in Sri Lanka, particularly around agricultural policies. You'd think that in a country that venerates its farmer community so much, agricultural areas are important political constituencies, right? And often they're vulnerable in terms of poverty numbers. And agriculture as a sector still very much matters for the economy and to the country, right? Whether it's for domestic food production or exports. you'd think, given all this, that Sri Lanka would be a lot more careful and more measured in taking policy measures regarding the sector. But successive governments seem to be making quite a bit of ad hoc policy changes regarding fertilizer distribution, subsidies, guaranteed prices, timely water release into farming areas. So, in general, on the policy question, what do you have any thoughts on this puzzle? Basic summary is huge important sector, a lot of people depend on it, very strong political constituency, but we still seem to go ahead and make quite flippant policy changes.
Right. I think this is my analysis on it, Anushka, and I think one of the biggest reasons why we don't have an agreed or a written policy for agriculture yet is because somehow our policymakers have identified these agriculture farmers or the cohort as a cohort which is very important for their political agenda, right? So that's why the moment you try to put on an economic tool into agriculture, at the end of the day, it comes out as a political tool, right? The best example is subsidy, right? And the moment you take out the subsidy, the government fails, right? The moment you say we're going to give the subsidy, the government comes into power. We have enough examples, you know, and even right now, I saw in social media and other media, some of the opposition parties are talking about giving the chemical fertilizers back if they come to power. Now we are talking about now you and I are talking about a long-term phased out vision for organic agriculture. Now the policymakers are taking it as a political token, right? So that's, I think that's where the whole issue is. But if you look at the policy formulation throughout, I'll take this last 5-6 years, Anushka. If you look at the last 5-6 years, there was a policy that put on table somewhere around 6 years back. I think it was funded by Food and Agriculture Organization. It was a policy that was put out for the whole agriculture sector and was allowed to debated by everybody. And but it never got anywhere, right? It was a comprehensive written document. I'm not sure whether you can see it online, but it's the printed form is there. But it never went anywhere, right? It got stuck. And then, interestingly, European Union came into the country. European Union in 2016 they had a fully fledged agricultural operation. Usually, EU doesn't do agriculture operations, but in Sri Lanka they wanted to do something. And biggest component of that project, EU funded TAMAT, Technical Assistance for Modernization of Agriculture project, is coming up with an overarching agriculture policy. The moment you say overarching, it's because we have a lot of policies here and there. Now, EU wanted to bring all these policies together and have an overarching agriculture policy for the country for next 10 years. So that was their plan. And I got myself involved in it as well at one point. It was handled by a very confident international and local consultancy group. But that it went through a rigorous stakeholder consultation as well for about 1.5 years. But then it got, distracted by the political changes happened during 2017 and 18 and 19, right? So it was here and there. It was presented to the foreign agriculture ministry. It was presented to the finance ministry, but never got anywhere. And finally, it came to the cabinet. The moment it came to the cabinet, the whole cabinet changed, right? So we spent quite a lot of time, a lot of euros developing this overarching agriculture policy, but it was never materialized. And then when the new government came into power with the new ministers, under new ministers' observation, there was another committee set up to do a national agriculture policy, NAP, right? National agriculture policy for food and feed crops. So this was the latest document that was circulated among public and everybody to provide comments. And this was just before the decision on going full organic. Now the question is, where does that stand?
Where does it stand exactly? Yeah.
Where does it stand? And the interesting part, Anushka, is that the people who have been engaging in this whole policy dialogue are the ones who are right now holding big positions in this organic drive as well, right? To give you a simple example, this everybody knows this. Current secretary to the Ministry of Agriculture is the one who spearheaded the national agriculture policy, right? So he has a very, let's say, very hands-on experience on doing the national agriculture policy, and he can simply take it up and couple with the new organic policy. But it's not happening.
So we say,
It's not happening. Rather, what we have is two committees, one under the president, a presidential committee, 42-member committee, which is looking at sustainable agriculture and climate change. That at the presidential level. And Anushka, I'm not sure whether you followed. It was announced yesterday. The minister has appointed another ministerial committee with, I think, 12 members to spearhead the agriculture policy. So we don't have a policy, but whatever the policy we have. So we don't have a policy, but now we have a presidential committee and a ministerial committee. So,
yeah,
so there's a mismatch, right? And then Anushka, you know this, more than me, you have a national export strategy,
yes,
right? And under the national export strategy, there's a huge, chunk of pages allocated for agriculture exports.
yes,
But where is the link to that, to the agriculture policy?
yeah, yeah.
And it's not there.
I think this is, yeah. So it's this is of course both surprising and unsurprising sometimes, because we see this in other policy areas as well. That while we are very good at establishing policy processes like these committees and policy formulation groups, but then making sure that it links to actual decisions that are taken, uh, it
Yes.
that's where there is a gap. So I mean, I'm sure we can talk about this policy conundrum for hours, but I want to uh, bring this conversation to a close, Chatura, by asking maybe a wider question to zoom out a bit. So while we consider organic the farming question, we have a larger question about environmental sustainability of our agricultural practices. Um, now I have kind of two questions embedded in this. One um, is so for folks like us who don't quite understand this space, is the shift to organic farming equals the environmental sustainability of our agriculture sector? What I mean is that the one and main thing? If we get that right, our agriculture sector can be called, we are sustainable, sustainability practices, environmental sustainability is there. Or is this one of many things? Is the organic piece one of many things? And you worked with the second question that was more macro. The second question is, you, because of your work with farmers, uh, is there an understanding and awareness of the implications of global climate change on their crops and farming habits, apart from observationally them seeing changes, but beyond that, is there an understanding, and is there willing to do new things?
Right. To answer your first question, Anushka, I think it's one of many things. Now, organic agriculture is, by its definition, is a sustainable system, right? And it's one of the main, let's say, main component of it is what we call ecological goods and services. That's where we talk about biodiversity increases, soil protection, lesser water pollution, enhanced soil fertility, and all those things. So doing organic agriculture to a certain extent will achieve the sustainability in terms of environment, of course. But organic agriculture is not the only one. Now, if you look at good agriculture practices, it is also achieving the sustainability, because you are only applying recommended level of chemicals. You never go beyond maximum residual levels, right? You work on a very identified, very well defined framework. And again, like things like rainforest alliance certifications, RA certifications, which is something coming up in the global arena, or regenerative agriculture, where you talk about human elephant conflicts and all that. And then, as I said earlier, non-pesticide management agriculture, low input agriculture, all these things are sustainable agricultural models which at the end of the day will give you environment sustainability. So that's how I define it, right? And then to come to your question on climate change. Now, and I would like to link climate change with organic agriculture for a minute. Now, especially in terms of paddy, Anushka, through research, we have found out that most of our traditional varieties, traditional rice varieties, when they are grown under organic conditions, are more vigorous to climate change impacts. Now, for example, droughts and floods. So
You
there's
mean
enough research
resistant?
being done.
They're
Yeah,
resistant to.
persist.
Okay, okay.
Right. So that means the way the morphology of the traditional tree variety, uh, tea, rice variety, and the farming practice you adapt with organic agriculture will allow that plant to withstand heavy weathers, right? Heavy rain or heavy droughts. It can withstand that. So there is a link from climate change to organic agriculture as well, right? But if you look at broadly in terms of climate change, I argue, Anushka, that in terms of policy arena, also climate change has gone quite far compared to agriculture because we have a climate change policy, we have a climate change strategy, and we have a climate change adaptation action plan as well. Right there, we have about I think 5-6 pages dedicated to agriculture sector. This document, I mean, we did while we were at IPS, right? It's a product of IPS. So, but how much has it been used? Now, one of the things that we spoke during that document also, Anushka, is that in order for you to fight climate change, number one thing is you have to educate the farmer. He needs to realize that, okay, what I am facing right now is a climate change event, right? So he has to understand that. But where is this knowledge? Is it happening? And even we 5-6 years back we were talking with even meteorology department trying to come up with what we call this climate change information products, right? How can we use smartphones to communicate weather information? How can we communicate new farming practices which aligns with climate change impacts to farmer more efficiently, right? But I don't think those are happening. So to answer your question there, though we see quite a lot of information, let's say the younger generation is more towards searching for information through websites or YouTube or whatever. The other generation are lacking information in terms of climate change impact. They have only heard about it, but they don't know what to do. And even if you look at the government interventions towards addressing these climate change impacts, it has been only centered into one or two entities. It's not in their broader policy agenda. I think climate change impacts has to be one of the clear cutting themes in a agriculture policy. It's not there. So I see a willingness, especially in terms of the younger population, but the older population need more, and we have to do quite a lot of things in order for us to educate them.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chatura, for spending this
Sure,
time.
Anushka.
I certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure folks who listen to this and watch this will also. I think it was refreshing because I've tried to follow this debate as someone who doesn't understand agriculture economics as much. I try to follow this debate with all the articles. But I think what I found refreshing with what you're saying is that rather than just the fear mongering about why it shouldn't be done, solutions, right? How could we do it now that this decision
That's
is taken? How can we make sure that it has the least disruption, that it's phased better, that it's the different, what are the different elements we need to think about? And that's what I really appreciated about this conversation, and it's the approach that the Center for a Smart Future also likes to take, solutions oriented thinking. So thank you very much, Chatura, for joining, and
sure,
hope
Anushka.
we'll connect again soon. Thank you.
Sure, sure.